This is Chapter 10, Congress, Discussion Number 2, the House and Reapportionment. The House of Representatives has 435 members. Now, that number is not established by the Constitution. In fact, for a long period of time in American history, the number was simply growing because it was, for example, every 25,000 or every 30,000 people that you had in the state, you got another member of Congress. However, when we get to the 1920s, Congress was having a hard time getting everyone an opportunity to talk and to participate. They had 435 people, and it was becoming unwieldy. So they made the decision that Congress would now the House of Representatives would only have 435 people. See, up until this point, it was impossible to lose a number of how many people you had in Congress per state. But now that we're limiting it to 435, as some states grow faster than others, they get a higher proportion of the members of the House of Representatives. So in that way, it can be seen that a state loses members of Congress. Since I'm making this in Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania has been losing the total number of members of Congress over the last three census, at least, as other states, for example, California, Florida, have all grown over time faster than Pennsylvania, and therefore they get a larger percentage of the membership of the House. Now, every state is, no matter what, guaranteed at least one representative. And those representatives, as I mentioned, are based on the census. They get elected to two-year terms. So, let's say you'd like to become a member of the House of Representatives. There are some basic requirements that you have to satisfy. First of all, you have to be at least 25 years of age. You need to be a citizen of the United States for at least 7 years, and you need to inhabit the state from which you were being elected. Now, this gets a little bit curious because different states have different requirements in order for you to be considered inhabitant of the state. That qualification is not based on a federal definition, it's actually based on the state definition. So as long as the state considers you an inhabitant of that state, then you are allowed to be a representative of that state. Now, let's say you get yourself elected to the House of Representatives, and then it was discovered that you created an imaginary voting place and gave yourself 1 million extra votes. And then that was discovered that you cheated. The House of Representatives, even though the Secretary of the State for that particular state said this person won, and then it was discovered, but it was still the official results, then the House of Representatives still has the opportunity to say, no, you cannot be a member of this House. So if they challenge your credentials before you are sworn in, a majority vote can have you not be seated with the House of Representatives. However, after you've been sworn in and you're officially a member of the House, you can only be expelled by a 2/3 vote of the members, and that's if you do something pretty bad. So, it is a requirement in the Congress or in the Constitution that they have to count the total population of the country every 10 years. And specifically, they're supposed to be counting it to make sure that the different states' populations are accounted for and so that they can figure out how many representatives you're supposed to get. So, this decennial census every 10 years. Then, what Congress did, and they have since washed their hands of it, as soon as they started cutting states out, they realized that it was a political hot potato for essentially people voting themselves out of a job. And so they handed over to the Census Bureau, and then the Census Bureau is the official organization that comes up with how many representatives each state gets. And then Congress just says yes or no to that, and it relieves them a lot of that decision-making process, and again, that political suicide for that 1 or 2 members of Congress or 5 members of Congress who all of a sudden discover that their state's going to have one less representative in the House, and it's probably going to be their job that's going to be eliminated. So, Congress does decide the date of the elections. They have decided that the elections will take place on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. Now, Congress has something about not allowing elections on the first of the month. This goes back to in the 1800s and 1900s, where a lot of times people got paid on the first of the month of what they did the previous month. And the members of the business world would say to their employees, if you want your paycheck, make sure you vote for so and so. And so, one of the reasons why they don't want it on the first is that they want to at least have that separation of time so that the owners would not be able to impress upon their employees who they ought to vote for. Of course, a lot of that voting was also done in the open, where you went in front of everyone and you say, I vote for so and so. The secret ballot had not yet come in when a lot of this idea of protecting the vote had come in. Now, each member of the House is elected from a specific territory within a state. This is called a single member district. If you would take a look at a congressional map of Pennsylvania, you would see there's lots of lines over it, and this says that the member of Congress, everyone in that area votes for that one person that they want to represent them in Congress. Now, there are some states that only have one member of the House of Representatives because they simply don't have the population to warrant a second or third one. And so while we call the single member district for when you have multiple representatives coming from one state, when it's the whole state electing the one person, it is referred to as at large. And they are elected at large for their 2-year term in the same way that the senators, which represent the whole state, are elected at large. Now, remember I said about those lines all over the political state. Well, one of the things that becomes very interesting is that the states themselves are responsible to draw the lines of where those people are going to be electing that singular person for the House of Representatives. And there had become some political practices that started way back in the beginning of the American Constitution that has since become known as gerrymandering, because it was first accused of being done against a member of actually the Constitutional Convention, Elbridge Gerry. And what was going on is that in Massachusetts, he wanted to make sure, and his political friends wanted to make sure, that he could be elected to the House of Representatives. So they drew some extremely interesting lines, trying to essentially cherry pick the groups of people that they were pretty sure would vote in his favor. And then they said, poof, there's a congressional district. And lo and behold, when the next elections came around, Elbridge Gerry got a lot of votes from that specially drawn district. It didn't make a whole bunch of sense. And that's how he got elected. And people were saying, wait a minute, we really ought to make this that it makes sense for the lines, and not trying to cherry pick. So it ought to be based on community. It ought to be based on geography. It ought to be based on fill in the gaps. Now, one other thing that they had to be careful for with reapportionment is that it is now required by the Supreme Court in a decision called Westbury v. Sanders, is that all the congressional districts need to have approximately an equal amount of population. See, what was going on is that there might have been districts with 1,000 people in it, and more in other congressional districts that had 10,000 people in it. And I'm talking early on. The numbers are much larger now. And so, if you were in the district with only 1,000 people, your vote for a member of Congress was one in 1,000. But if you were in the larger district, your vote was one in 10,000, which meant that you had a much lesser significance in your vote. And the Supreme Court says that's not the democratic principle, that ought to be one person, one vote, and they ought to have the same effect no matter where you live. And so that's why reapportionment has to be done every 10 years, because people move around. This concludes discussion number 2, the House of Reapportionment, as a part of Chapter 10, Congress.